Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this session on class and gender. We begin with Annelies. Andries, sorry, for you at home watching on YouTube, my name is Jed Wentz. I'm chairing this session. We begin with a paper by Annelies Andries, who is Assistant Professor of Musicology at Utrecht University. Her research focuses on the development of Central European music cultures in the wake of 19th century military conflicts, particularly the Napoleonic Wars. Her work has been published in the Journal of War and Culture Studies, Cambridge Opera Journal, French Historical Studies, among others. She recently collaborated with the Musée National des Châteaux de ma Maison on romances from the Napoleonic period, which resulted in various publications and 2 CDs. In 2023, she received a junior scholarship from the University of Bayreuth to study early 19th century opera translations in Munich from a performative perspective, and she is a member of the Dutch Historical Acting Collective. The title of her paper today is Parbleu, Sapperment, Voice, Dialect and Class in Theatrical Translation.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this conference. I've really enjoyed all of the papers. So thank you, Barbara, for the organization, and you and the whole program committee on bringing such wonderful people together. I also want to say that I'm standing here alone, but I'm not standing here alone. Leila will join me, but I also have to thank the members of the Dutch Historical Acting Collective, and especially João Paixão, who's helped me figure out some of the elements of my paper, especially the performative ones. In 1803, Johann Wolfgang Goethe formulated a set of rules for 2 young aspiring actors. The very first one warned against the use of dialect, and I quote, "If provincialisms creep into a tragic speech, even the finest poetry is marred, and the audience's ears are offended. It is therefore the first and most essential task for the aspiring actor to rid himself of all dialectal flaws, and to strive to achieve a completely pure pronunciation. No provincialism has any place on the stage. There, only pure German language should prevail, as it has been shaped and refined by taste, art, and science." End of quote. Around the same time, the French opera comique Les Deux Journées took German theaters by storm after its successful Parisian premiere in 1800. The music was written by Luigi Cherubini to a libretto by Jean-Nicolas Bouilly. The opera narrates the adventures of Antoine Micheli, a water carrier, and his family, living in Paris but originally from Savoie. They help Count Armand and his wife Constance escape prosecution by the authorities. The Savoyard dialect, or at least an important imitation thereof, plays an important role in the story. It clearly marks the class differences between Micheli's family and the Count and Count lines, a feature often used to explain the opera's popularity in conflict-ridden post-revolutionary France. The dialect also has a clear dramatic function when Constance is dressing herself up as Marceline, Micheli's daughter, to escape Paris. The only existing image of the opera also points to the dialect. As you can see there below the image, it includes a very common contraction, the ne, it's ne le troquerai, it becomes ne le troquerai, and it also mentions the interpolation "eh ben," which is very often heard with these characters. Les Deux Journées was mostly found on the German stages in translation under the title Der Wasserträger or Graf Armand. It could be seen in Frankfurt and München from 1801 onward, and in Vienna and Berlin from 1802, and then in many other cities. Goethe himself expressed appreciation for the plot and its subtle morality. Yet a key characteristic of the original French, the imitation of dialect, which you might see here if you read these are the 3 main translations, is not actually taken over. And according to Herbert Schneider, such a weakening or complete erasure of dialect in German opera translation was common practice at the time. In this paper, I will explore to what extent dialectal speech was integrated in 18th and early 19th century French performance of opera comique and in Germany as well. The paper will include some brief demonstrations and ultimately end with a reflection on the absence of dialectal orthography in the German libretti. In 18th century French acting and declamation treatises, emphasis is on a so-called pure and clear pronunciation, thus suggesting that the use of dialect should be avoided. In addition, a handful of satiric works make fun of provincial characters, amateur or professional, who are on the stage unable to get rid of their accents. Yet there seems to have been a distinction between tragedy and comedy. As David Charlton has discussed, the principal actors of French comedy troupes were expected to master various dialects. Marie-Justine Benoît-Favart, here she is, one of the best-known opera comique performers of the mid-18th century, for instance, was well known for her virtuosic use of dialects. She used them not only when noble characters are disguised, like Constance, but also to portray reportedly the true nature of sentimental pastoral heroines, such as the titular girls in Les Amours de Bastien et Bastienne of 1753, and, as you see depicted here, Ninette à la Cour of 1755. She's also famed as one of the first actresses who also adjusted her dress to the specific role. Throughout the 18th century, Savoyard characters are found in multiple French comedic works. They were often used for comic relief, depicted pejoratively as uncouth peasant, or more positively as simple, naive country folk, often with a penchant for bursting into song. Thus they resemble Rousseau's so-called noble savage. Unspoiled by the vicissitudes of urban life, they are good at heart and live in harmony with their neighbors and nature. Many such pictorial idealizations were in circulation at the time, and the Savoyard costume became part of the repertoire that noble women used to mimic idyllic pastoral life. And this is kind of in reference also to what Maria Antoinette was doing at Le Hameau in Versailles. Naive Savoyard characters became quite popular towards the end of the century. One of the most popular works was Les Deux Petits Savoyards, with music by Nicolas Dalérac and a libretto by Benoît-Joseph Marcelier. It premiered a couple of months before the 1789 revolution struck and became incredibly popular. In it, two poor Savoyard boys discover that they are related to a wealthy landowner in Lyon, and eventually they are adopted into his family. Les Deux Journées surfed on the wave of popularity of such depictions and their idealistic Arcadian notions of class solidarity, even if its message is more political. So in Les Deux Journées, we have Count Armand. He's a member of parliament and is persecuted for criticizing Cardinal Mazarin and hailed by the people as their hero. While the plot was supposedly inspired by contemporary events, fear of censorship reportedly made Bouilly move the plot to the Fronde of 1647. The plot clearly identifies Michele's family as from Savoie, a region in the northwest side of the Alps, and his son, Antonio, is marrying into a farmer's family from Gonesse, a village north of Paris. Despite these references to existing places, the lower class characters are more pastoral idealizations than referencing real life. This is also true for the dialectal speech that they are given. Most obviously is the characteristic that they have frequent contractions of words, especially articles, pronouns, and auxiliary verbs. And as these are often less vital for understanding the meaning, dialectal color was thus provided without fully endangering comprehensibility. In addition, the text is sprinkled with interjections that gesture at lower class identity, so a lot of oufs, which point to the character's physical presence, parbleu, a light form of cursing, and a favorite exclamation, eh ben. Actual dialectal Savoyard words are absent. Sometimes you also find orthography that is changed to alter the vowel sounds. In fact, the dialectal treatment in the libretto of Les Deux Journées is rather light. In Les Deux Petits Savoyards, the boys are much more frequently changing the vowel sounds, and they are regularly misconjugating verbs. As was common, musical numbers contain even less dialectal color. In the first two couplets of Michele's first musical number, a romance, only 4 contractions are found, and you can find them here in lines 2, 4, 7, and 14, and 1 respelling of quelque as que. This may not surprise, since contractions delete vowels and multiply the number of consecutive consonants, so they would make singing very difficult. Cherubini also uses a conventional musical number to signal Michele's unsophisticated but good nature. It is a romance with a syllabic, largely stepwise melody, multiple parallel phrases, and rather straightforward harmonic progressions. And I'm just going to let you listen to the very beginning of this.
Pour laquelle jouissance sauver des époux de passer. Oh, il est plein pour la nature de souvenirs plus caressants que celui qui à tout bas murmure. J'ai secouru, j'ai sauvé l'innocent, j'ai secouru, j'ai sauvé l'innocent.
Oh, sorry. There we go. The contrast is stark with the first number of the Countess, a duet with her husband in which she proclaims to prefer dying for him over leaving him. Her noble status is illustrated by the elevated, intense passions, which Cherubini musically underscores with a complex mixture of recitative, arioso, and aria-like textures, and a moderately ornamented melody with some considerable trums and a range of 1.5 octaves. As to be expected, none of her spoken or sung text hints at a dialectal idiom. That is, until she disguises herself in Act 2 as Michele's daughter, Marceline, in order to leave Paris undetected. However, she is stopped by a guard and questioned, for Marceline's passport does not provide the correct hair and eye color. Very interestingly, there is a lot of differentiation between even various prints of the French libretti, but also all of the German libretti, which seem to adjust it to the singers who were actually performing. The Countess's freedom is now dependent on how convincingly she imitates the Savoyard girl. Thus, she is not only dressed like Michele's daughter, but also takes on her dialectal idiom. Somewhat exaggerated, and you see the text here, because there are quite a lot of contractions, quite a lot more than in the other characters, and she's also more frequently changing the sound of the vowels. As I briefly mentioned at the outset, the German translations do not translate the dialectal idiom. So what are the other acting strategies that may have been used to make the disguise effective? For the French version, I've taken recourse to 2 treatises, Dorfeuille's Les éléments de l'art du comédien, written between 1798 and 1801, and François Boisquet's Essai sur l'art du comédien chanteur of 1812. Boisquet argues that for tragic characters, one should take recourse to paintings of kings and queens, gods, heroes, and such. But for comic characters, it is more important to observe the people around you. As those people are not available to us, I have Pache Boisquet taken recourse to depictions, after all. But you can look here at those of Les Petits Savoyards and the one of Michele. And it's clear that such Savoyard characters are often portrayed as somewhat slumped. I mean, it may be with Michele because he's carrying water, but you also find them in other depictions of Savoyard characters more generally. They're making themselves smaller and without a clear contrapost position. In addition, Boisquet suggests that for a lower class girl of 18 with the air of an ingénue, which is indicated here on the score, she's awkward, she's trembling. He suggests that a tone of voice should be used that does not contain either the roughness of warriors nor the intensity of elevated passions. This can be further specified with advice from This is a kind of tone with a simple and tight flow, a simple or a tight flow, a débit serré, and a lightness in the pronunciation, all animated by a lively and ardent imagination. The short abbreviated sentences in the libretto have made me choose a tighter but somewhat interrupted flow, and since the vocal range of the musical numbers for Marceline or for Constance as Marceline is smaller but centered slightly higher in the register, I have also pitched the speech higher. And thank you to Laila for now helping me with the scene. Oh, I also wanted to say I haven't managed to learn it all by heart. We're primarily focusing on the voice, but it helps to have some gestures. So I am Constance as Marceline, arriving, handing Laila, the guards, my passport.
Ça ne vaut rien, ça. Le signalement est faux.
Dame, je vous le donne moi. Comment on me l'a délivré?
Comment te nommes-tu?
Anne-Marceline Micheli, quoi donc?
Ton âge?
18 ans?
Ta demeure?
Chez mon père Antoine Micheli, savoyard, porteur d'eau, qui demeure rue d'Anjou, dans ce quartier, tout près d'ici.
Où vas-tu?
Aux noces de mon frère Antonio, que voilà, et qui est venu me chercher de Gonesse, comme par ainsi que vous avez pu voir sur ce papier.
Oh, sorry. As mentioned, the German versions do not translate the dialectal idiom. In the version from Munich, however, there are a few linguistic elements that gesture towards a lower class identity. The use of diminutive words such as Pünktchen and interjections such as Du mein Gott, Ei zum Henker from Antonio, which we've cut out of the scene, and Ei nun. What to do then? One option is to play the character with a clear High German pronunciation, for which Goethe identifies that sharp, clear vowels are especially important. For this version, I have primarily taken recourse to Gustav Anton Freiherr von Seckendorff's Vorlesung über Deklamation und Mimik from 1818. Like Dorfeuille, he divides the voice into tones, though they are somewhat different. The ingenue portrayal of Constance, disguised as Marceline, makes it most appropriate here to use the fifth class of tone, what he calls the naive register. It can contain small outbursts and quick changes, but not too quick or drastic, so it evokes empathy rather than laughter. Even though he characterizes the German voice as metallic, that quality should be completely absent from the naive tone. It is also worth noting that in the German translation, Constance's phrases are slightly longer than the French, and she appears slightly cheekier, which you will hopefully hear at the end of the scene. But we'll do the performances one after the other. Now, what to do if we do insert dialect? After all, Goethe and Seckendorff also reference the tragic as... Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry, no. Yet like Goethe, Seckendorff is also against the inclusion of dialect in theater, which he considers, and I quote, superficial, shallow, and even undignified. However, both specifically reference tragedy rather than comedy. Perhaps it would have been possible to insert some dialectal sounds. After all, the Vorlesungen also discuss four German Mundarten or dialects. Since I have chosen the Munich version, the second option includes some of those sounds. According to Seckendorff, in Franken, Schwaben, Bayern, and Oberrhein, vowels are held on longer, diphthongs are sounded with their constituent parts, and double consonants are often softened. The more south one goes, the more sensitive, empfindungsvoll, and warm, gemütlich the tones, and the more outspoken the lilt in the declamatory melody. So now you'll see the two versions of the German. We'll first do the one in the High German voice.
Der Pass gilt nicht. Das Signalement ist falsch.
Hat mir den doch so gegeben, wie er ist. Nicht ein Pünktchen ist daran verändert.
Wie ist dein Name?
Anna Marceline Micheli heiß ich.
Dein Alter?
18 Jahre.
Deine Wohnung?
Bei meinem Vater, dem Savoyarden Micheli, der Wasserträger ist und in der Straße d'Anjou wohnt. Es ist gar nicht weit von hier.
Wo gehst du hin?
Nun mit meinem Bruder gehe ich, der doch ist. Vor ein paar Tagen ist er von Gonesse hereingekommen, um mich zu seiner Hochzeit abzuholen. Wenn mir der Herr nicht glaubt, so lese es nur das Papier noch einmal, da steht's drin.
Der Pass gilt nicht. Das Signalement ist falsch.
Du, mein Gott, der Kommissar hat mir dich doch so gegeben, wie er ist. Nicht ein Pünktchen ist daran verändert.
Wie ist dein Name?
Anna Marceline Micheli heiß ich.
Dein Alter?
18 Jahre.
Deine Wohnung?
Bei meinem Vater, dem Savoyarden Micheli, der Wasserträger ist und in der Straße d'Anjou wohnt. Es ist gar nicht weit von hier.
Wo gehst du hin?
Nun, mit meinem Bruder gehe ich, der da ist. Vor ein paar Tagen ist er von Gonesse hereingekommen, um mich zu seiner Hochzeit abzuholen. Wenn mir der Herr nicht glaubt, so lese er nur das Papier noch einmal. Da steht alles da drin.
So to what extent may a dialectical idiom have been used in actual German performances of Cherubini's operas? So far, I've been unable to locate reviews or other testimonies about performances that mention the use of dialect. Yet if it was there, it may have been such a common feature that it did not merit a specific mention. After all, none of the French reviews mentioned the use of dialect either. Could praise for the authentic performance of these lower-class characters or references to Micheli as a Volksfigur be interpreted as evidence? Do strong warnings of Goethe and Seckendorf against the use of dialect suggest that it was done? Perhaps. Like yesterday, with Jacques Dupuis' paper on Sophie Schröder, we find ourselves in a moment when intellectuals, authors, and artists were intensely debating German identity, an identity that included imaginations of language, voice, and class. One of the more utopic ideas about the potential power of language found its way into Seckendorf's Vorlesungen. And I quote, "Who could doubt that a more widespread refinement of language is to be desired, since, with freer means of expression, the mind itself becomes freer, and the refinement of humanity is just as much an end in itself as is the prevention of crime?" End of quote. From such a perspective, it would only be expected that simple but honest Savoyard, like Micheli, would eventually learn to speak in Goethe's words, and I quote, "the pure German language as it has been shaped and refined by taste, art, and science," end of quote. Yet it still leaves a lot of other vocal means, such as tone, rhythm, tempo, to vocally represent class identity. Thank you.
Thank you, Annelies. Now we're moving on to Matthew Franke. Oh, you don't, okay, yes. Matthew is a senior lecturer in music history at Howard University. His research focuses on music in the late 19th century, particularly the Italian reception of the operas of Bizet and Massenet, as well as nationalism in the music of Samuel Coleridge Taylor. He has published articles in journals such as Acta Musicologica, 19th Century Music Review, and the Journal for the Society of American Music. He is currently working on a book project on non-normative masculinities in fin de siècle opera, and he also curates the list of open access music journals. And today his paper is entitled Turiddu, des Grieux and Men's Emotions in Late 19th Century Opera.
Thank you so much for that welcome and that introduction, Jed. And thank you to the conference committee and the whole team here at University of Surrey, Fly Hill campus, for all their wonderful work to make this conference possible. Let's get started. On February 1st, 1893, Giacomo Puccini's Manon Lescaut premiered at the Teatro Regio in Torino. It was a great success, not least because of the dramatic ending of the third act. Here, the male protagonist, the Chevalier de Grieux, has attacked the crew of a prison ship, attempting to rescue his lover Manon. He fails and then has to beg mercy from the ship's crew. Puccini's score calls for de Grieux to make quite a scene. According to the stage directions, he is overcome by profound emotion. He explodes in an agonizing sob. He falls to his knees in front of the ship captain. One contemporary reviewer, I do not have the name, sorry, anonymous reviewer, was clearly overwhelmed by this scene and by tenor Giuseppe Cremonini's performance. So I'll give it to you in the Italian with my English translation is underneath. Durante tutta la scena e quando il de Grieux si offre di servire come mozzo di bastimento per non separarsi da Manon, si piange. Ed il pianto non è debolezza. This crying, this weeping was not weakness. That's the key line, I think. È il risultato dell'impressione che producono le grandi opere d'arte, I capolavori. So what we have is a tenor who is crying on stage, and the reviewer in the audience who is crying as well. And since this is from an Italian newspaper in 1893, it's safe to assume this is a male reviewer. So what we have is something quite curious. Why is this male reviewer at such pains to assure the readers that even though he cried, he did not cry from his own weakness? Why does he need to tell us this? And why does he need to assure his readers that his tears, in this case, were in fact justified tears? You get the sense, of course, this is from the 1890s, and gender norms are different in different times and places and classes and cultures, and we know this. But clearly, the implication, il pianto non è debolezza, is that male tears are a shameful thing, unless you can excuse them by the quality of the thing you're crying about. The delicacy and defensiveness with which our critic discusses his tears, and those of poor de Grieux on stage, therefore is telling us something about the construction and the performance of male gender identity in this time and place. But opera itself remains rather a tricky thing to negotiate, especially for men who have certain ideas about gender identity, because of course an opera is going to have a lot of emotional outpouring. Male and female characters will express their emotions. But many of the canonic operas that are still performed today were created at a time when men were not really expected or encouraged to cry publicly. And yet on the stage, the male characters must stand, they must sing, they must erupt into song. So even today, there are still these associations of opera as being overly emotional. Men who like opera sometimes have to enact a certain overtly performative masculinity to show that even if they like opera, even if I cried at La Boheme, I'm still one of the guys. if you've met such people, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if not, well, I can talk to you more about that later. So what I'm looking at today, in other words, is what does the music that men sing in opera tell us about conceptions of masculinity at the time? Now, in other words, this is something of a gender studies project, but of course it's well known that the study of opera and gender largely originated from a feminist lens. And for many people, of course, one of the foundational texts would be works like Catherine Clément's L'Opéra ou les Défunts des Femmes, Opera, The Undoing of Women. So because of this, there's been relatively little research on opera that explicitly engages with masculinity in and of itself. Outside of opera studies, there has emerged a field which carefully calls itself the study of men and masculinities to position itself as a complement to the study of women and gender, and not as an alternative or oppositional. And this is the work I'm drawing on, partly work of people such as Raewyn Connell or George L. Moss. There are, of course, a number of research articles and book chapters that have applied this to some degree, for opera especially. But there's only one full-length book, which is Philip Purvis's 2013 edited volume on operatic men and masculinities. Other than that, it's a field that is a little underdeveloped, although there's a lot of great work that has been done. So what I'm trying to do today is give you a little bit of the current book project I'm working on. So today I'm going to show you two arias for two characters from two very well-known operas. One, of course, is an aria for Turiddu from Pietro Mascagni's Cavalleria Rusticana from 1890, and then an aria for the Chevalier de Grieux from Giacomo Puccini's Manon Lescaut from 1893. These two characters, I argue, represent two different approaches to depicting men and masculinities in late 19th century opera. Turiddu seems to reflect a traditional construction of masculine restraint and honor, while de Grieux is a more nervous, emotional type, in tune with Puccini's modern audience and what contemporary medical thought would have described as male hysteria. Hysteria is in scare quotes on my page, but yes. So, a word about methodology, and I love charts, but I decided to be minimal. In my home discipline of musicology, the default stance has long been to analyze operatic characters as being created by a composer and a librettist. And the work of the scholar is often seen as analyzing the score, the libretto, the stage direction, solely to illuminate the conception of the work. When performance is considered, it is traditionally, I don't endorse this, been seen as an attempt to realize the composer's vision, not as a creative act in its own right. But recent work by a variety of scholars, such as Hilary Porras, Karen Henson, Sean Parr, Barbara Gentili, Joshua Newman, etc., have treated operatic performance as a serious topic of musicological inquiry. We're shifting away from the written text somewhat. Not that the written text doesn't matter, it's just maybe not the only text. I'm attempting to triangulate this approach, however. My own background is really in operatic reception studies. And when you study reception, you basically are trying to learn about the works, but you can only learn about them through the performance, yes? So, because you're getting descriptions of performances. So what I'm trying to do is explore what the creators seem to have intended, how the performers performed, and then how the audience reacted. Now, of course, this is a 20-minute paper, and there are time constraints, so I might not get there, but that's the goal I'm working toward. I just wanted to have that as a caveat. Now, let's get to Turiddu. There are norms in 19th century Italian opera. Men usually express their emotions in a controlled manner. If they surrender to emotion, which they have to sing an aria, there has to be a justifiable cause, and then they have to regain control without making too much of a fool of themselves. Performances of male emotion on stage therefore have to follow certain emotional dramatic patterns. There is a lover who desires a beloved, that's all right. An honorable man who's provoked into violence, and, well, more drastic examples would be, for example, Don José in Carmen, or Otello at the end of Verdi's opera. But even there, Otello gets to reclaim it and heroically retain his self-control when he kills himself, right? He's taking charge of the situation. And then, of course, there are other characters who have feelings, but they control them with difficulty, like Germain in Verdi's Traviata. Something like that. Okay, here comes a slide. Yes. As written, Turiddu's final scene in Cavalleria Rusticana is a study in repressed male emotion that is about to come out into the open. And if as written, it doesn't really. The general plot, of course, is that Turiddu is about to fight a duel with Alfio. He wants his mother to look after his girlfriend Santuzza in case the very worst happens. He also wants to say goodbye to his mother. What Turiddu says instead is, I'm going to be very, literal here. He says, Mom, I drank a lot of wine. Kind of went to my head. I'm going to go take a walk. Also, if I don't come back from the walk, would you just happen to look after her? But I'm just really drunk. She says to him, I'm sorry, what are you saying to me? And he's like, oh, Mom. And he literally, this is not in the libretto, but only in the opera score. He says, the wines told me this. No, to me it was still, he starts putting his sentences in weird orders. Right? I'm really drunk, Mama. I'm drunk. But I'd like to kiss you goodbye. And if I don't come back, look after her. Bye. Now, in the original story by Giovanni Verga, all he says is, hey, Mom, I'm going for a walk. When Verga adapted it to a stage play, Verga added in, Mom, I'm kind of drunk, I'm going for a walk. When it turned into an opera, it becomes an aria. So there's this sense, originally, there is nothing to be said. Yeah. And that's in the original naturalistic, verismo story. To be adapted to the stage, you have to expand it to make clear the implications. So, the music that Mascagni wrote for Turiddu to sing is about revealing a wealth of hidden emotion. And here, this is not an original insight, I don't think, but I'm going to focus mainly on the musical texture, if that makes sense. So when Turiddu sings something that reflects what he wants his mother to hear, he has a very light texture. And when he's saying something that reflects his secret fears, Mascagni employs the device of the sviolinata, where the strings double or triple the melodic line that Turiddu is singing, so that it's kind of hard to avoid that this is the main melody, and look, the whole orchestra is playing it along with him as he sings, and it's like this is clearly the main point. So that is, my pages are out of order. Oh no, they're not. We're good. So this device, therefore, underlines key points in the text. Specifically, Turiddu's plea that his mother will look after Santuzza. It's got very simple musical rhetoric, and it dramatizes the fact that men who are restraining their emotions still have these emotions. So, we're going to go to the next slide. I'll show you an example. So here you can see underlined, this is where the strings come in, and suddenly you have to be a mother to Santuzza. Because I promised I would lead her to the altar. We were going to get married, right? This is when the strings come in. Then she interrupts him. The strings go away. He says, I'm drunk. And then it comes back again, right? So just a brief clip. This is, of course, with Franco Corelli, who was a famous Turiddu. Started around 135. God, that's tiny. We'll pick it up right around here.
Mamma, sentite.
Here we are.
Siano tornati, tornati.
Here it comes.
Voi
There's a lot you can do with this. But you see how he shifts in and out. The strings are present. It seems to imply sincerity. But the music Mascagni gave us gives a lot of room for the performer to make creative choices. So, is Turiddu actually drunk in this scene? There's a lot of different ways to play this. And also, what do you do with Turiddu's vocal timbre? How emotional should he sound? So rather than explore all the possibilities, there aren't time. I'm going to give you two extremes. Specifically focusing at a point at the end of this scene when the orchestra drops out and leaves the voice completely isolated. So throughout, the strings come in, they seem to double the things that matter the most to Turiddu. But then at the very end, he says, one last time in case Mama didn't hear it, he says, just in case I don't come back, you have to look after Santuzza. Okay, fine. This is solo, right? Now you can play this really casually. You can play this. So on one end, here's Franco Corelli. Franco Corelli is basically going to be hyperventilating and choking back sobs throughout the whole thing. And this is very much a performance tradition that is associated with the role. And yes, so we'll play this. We must fast forward. Where am I? Why does it say 30? Oh, maybe it started at the beginning. I mean, come on. Bravo Corelli. Amazing, right? I love that one. But now, in other words, oh, this is restarting, which I don't mind. Come on. Oh, it's okay. It's okay. It really is I need you to... Sorry. So sorry. Okay, so the thing I'm kind of interested in here, you see, is that for a lot of us, this was the version, something like this is the version of Cavalleria Rusticana that is most often done today. Right? Turiddu is often played as breaking down in this scene. Here's an early recording from Riccardo Martin, actually an American tenor who took an Italian name to sound better for, since he was singing Italian opera. 1910. He takes a very, very different approach. He has a very disciplined, very restrained Turiddu. He has a slower tempo. His rhythms are regular. This is written very much as a cadenza where you could do almost what you want with the rhythm, and he is going to be very strict and regular. His Turiddu doesn't even slur his words. I don't know if he's playing it drunk or not, but he definitely is in control. It's a very different idea of the role. I feel like Turiddu calmly walks off stage to go fight his duel after that one, right? It's just not the same. Now, we don't have any recordings of Roberto Stagno, who was the first Turiddu, which is really sad. The reviews tell us something about how the audience felt. The main thing is, people cried. People cried a lot. And just like the opening review of de Grieux, the critics are kind of nervous about the fact that they cried. And again, they want to explain this. For example, the top one talks about how Stagno sings in such a way that he forces the tears from the listeners. They just can't help it, right? Because he's so good. And also, it's an expression of sorrow. It penetrates the soul. They nod a little bit toward the idea of realism, of course. He's not faking the feelings. He's really feeling it on stage. And then one I didn't put on here, which is the strangest one, and it gives us the best idea of how he might have performed it from what I've seen, describes this passage as being l'addio belliniano alla madre. Now, why you would invoke Vincenzo Bellini as a vocal model for this scene, the classic Italian bel canto style, is not how we're used to hearing it done. And whether that's actually how Stagno sang or it's just what this reviewer wanted to hear in it, I don't know. But what's clearly happening is that people are conflating, to some degree, what they hear with what they think the composer intended. The performance is becoming the text. So, I know I've been going on rather a long time. I hope I'm okay on time.
You're nearly at 20 minutes.
Yeah, that's very bad. I've gone way over. Okay, so I'm going to have to edit this extremely because I warned you that I improvise. Thank you for the time. Okay, so for de Grieux. Well, de Grieux does, he doesn't really restrain himself. The whole scene that de Grieux sings is all about de Grieux falling down and begging mercy from the captain of the ship in front of everybody. He literally is supposed to fall to his knees, weep, moan, fuss, cry, and make a tremendous scene of it. And this, in many ways, is crossing the line that you would often have historically, where tenors could express emotions, but they were supposed to recover. So I will have to abbreviate heavily because, yeah, I don't want to take too much of your time, and you've been so patient with me. I will have to pick one. But now I'm clipping. Oh, we'll just do the first one. It's very simple. Actually, crud. Hang on a minute. We'll circle back. We'll circle back to it because I have a certain order. Okay. What's going on with de Grieux? How could you stage a tenor who sings an aria? He's trying to be a hero. He's trying to do a violent rescue with weapons of his girlfriend, and then just it collapses. How could you stage this? Part of what's happening is that Puccini's opera is being staged at a time when there is a great deal of interest in men's mental health in a medical sense. There is a whole discourse of how men having mental illness was considered to be it was a feminine type of illness for men to have. They literally talked about most types of mental illnesses that we would now categorize differently, such as PTSD or various schizophrenic attacks or things like that. They would describe them as not only feminine illnesses, they would suggest the men who had them were in some way not typically or normatively male. So that's partly why I think these critics are so careful about the fact that they cried when they went to hear these operas. And there's also a broader context here which has to do with the idea of what is wrong with society today. And that comes out somewhat in one of the more famous critical attacks on opera in late 19th century Italy by the Italian musicologist Fausto Franke, who writes this thing, which was translated in a marvelous fashion by Delia Casadei, describing de Grieux and a bunch of other characters as the invertebrate men from the world of neurasthenic lovers and raging hypochondriacs. And there's a whole context for this. There's this idea, of course, that if you depict weak men on the stage, it will do something to the national character and it will hurt the nation. And there's a whole discourse of decadence and the collapse of all of humanity, basically, if you have too many emotional men on stage. Puccini's response to Franke is to say, I would like to beat him up, because it gets messy. So what you have going on here, though, it's been very common for musicologists to talk about this and say, either Franke was young, he was very passionate, we should not take it seriously, we should say, oh, this reflects a certain atmosphere of nationalism in Italy in the 1910s. I don't disagree with any of that, but what I think is important is that there actually is a sort of coding of men as emotional beings in this music of the late 1890s, where things are being done differently. So again, here is a moment from de Grieux's aria. I had more examples to share, but I just talked too much, so I'll do one and we'll close. And this is, again, the collapse. We have Beniamino Gigli. This is, unlike Turiddu, who's trying to hold it in. We're not trying to hold it in. He's surrendering to the captain, yes? it's all just open, blatant tears. Grieux never gets up off of his knees until the end of the song, right? Actually, people differ when he gets on his knees. Anyway, I know I need to wrap up. I'll be good. So what I've been trying to put out here is that if you look at the written texts, these two characters seem very different. Turiddu's holding his emotions in check. Grieux is having this public breakdown in a crowd scene. We have no recordings of the singers who did these, but they clearly made people cry. Their reception allows us to gives us a sense of how they interpreted this. So they're reflecting two different norms of masculine behavior. So in closing, I'm really interested in this tension between the performer and the composer and what the listener hears. People have long asked how Mascagni or Puccini wrote the music that they gave to these characters, but when we look at how the singers chose to interpret it, we get a slightly different perspective. And our idea of what the work is partly depends on these performances that we heard. So by treating the performance as text in addition to the notation and centering these listeners' reactions, I hope I have complicated our reflections on the work of the theatrical voice. Thank you so much.
And now we will take up the 5-minute discussion period. Perhaps I'll cut it a bit short to make sure that we can have question time. So, amongst yourselves.
But I think so. That's nice. It was amazing. My first year at university, I was in an anthropology seminar in Durham, which is like a very popular university. And we kind of like started was like, do you have an accent? And the amount of people who said no was really staggering because they didn't see pronunciation and accent as an absence of an accent.
I noticed that received pronunciation.
No.
So it's what kind of what you're thinking about the language. So we have a name, this name received pronunciation.
Yeah.
It was a lot of first thing.
Well, maybe it should be 30 minutes. That's the long recording. Because then you can actually develop.
If you go back to like the end received Annelies, it's 100 years ago. I forget if who was his first name. Which is another kind of weird variation of the point is otherwise the received voice. It's an effective It's interesting that contemporary BBC or media are all about away from it.
The sentiment in that was the lady across. Well, and then you get Oscar Wilde and nobody else.
That makes me kind of want to get rid of
There was definitely a moment Scottish From the very animated. Am I? Hello? Hello?
From the very animated buzz, I think we will have some questions. Can we start with a question, please? All that buzzing and no questions. Thank you.
Thank you for both presentations. My question is for Annelies. I was wondering if there is like a political undertone in using, especially in French, the dialect, because I know during the Terror they cut a lot of heads about not using proper French and using regionalism and all. And so there is a kind of resistance to do theatre with dialects. And I know you said the German was really against it, but even in France, I think. So I was wondering about that.
Well, but then you have Les Deux Petits Savoyards, which is a much more extreme version of the dialect. So I wonder, it's very based on the kind of theater that you do. So tragic theater, I don't think you would ever do it. Comic theater, there are these characters that represent something. And I think the Savoyards, because they're so close to the Alps, they've very much become this Rousseauian figure of like the ideal of the noble savage. And I think that allowed for the dialect to be there in these kind of performances. But it's like, it's incredible how cleaned up it becomes by Les Deux Journées in comparison to some earlier. But yeah, there is much more dialects in the vaudeville, etc. So it really kind of decreases the higher up you go on the scale of the theater.
Do we have another question?
My question is to Matthew. Could you elaborate on the reception of Ricardo and Martin's approach to Turiddu? Because I was wondering what the audience was expecting, how they reacted to this idea of masculinity. I was thinking that is it maybe about postponing the moment of emotional collapse? Because I sort of realized that it can be a tactic for screen or theatrical masculinity to postpone the moment of the collapse the furthest possible. Was that his approach?
I don't know a lot about it, honestly. I found Martin's recording very late in this project, but it was so different from some others I'd heard, I felt it was the best contrast. I think looking into his reception would be fascinating, but if we think about how they described Stagno, the original Turiddu, as singing this in an almost Bellinian style, that would suggest that Stagno was actually, perhaps, if that's accurate, that would suggest Stagno might have been closer to how Martin sang. So, for all we know, it's a wonderful question. I just don't have the answer yet, but I am looking. I am definitely looking, because this shapes our perception of what we think the work is. And my suspicion, to build on this, is that the reason that Torre Franke was so hard on Puccini was because he'd seen a lot of very weepy tenors doing Puccini's roles, and they weren't doing anything restrained or ironic. That's my suspicion, but I don't know.
1, 2.
Who was first?
Thank you. Ivan Hewitt. Oh, sorry, I don't need to do that, do I? Just a couple of observations, really. Fascinating, Matthew's pointing out that the melody line in these over-emotional tenor parts are very heavily reinforced by instruments in the orchestra. And this reminded me that in that very well-known orchestration textbook by Walter Piston, the one we all grew up on, the orchestration of Mascagni and Puccini is criticized specifically for that, what he calls as a fault. He says, I think the word he uses is tuney. It's too tuney, he says. There are too many instruments playing the tune. And it doesn't seem to occur to him that maybe there's a point to that. So that I thought that was rather striking. And the other thing was that review, maybe it was, I forget whose it was now, which refers to the invertebrate quality of the men. And that reminded me that that interesting Spanish philosopher, Ortega y Gasset. His first book is called Invertebrate Spain. And it's precisely that. It's an analysis of the failure of Spanish men to rise to the occasion, you know, and that's why they lost the war with America, because they were invertebrate, you know. So just those two things, really.
Thank you so much. I did not know about the Invertebrate Spain book, so obviously
it's very interesting.
My summer reading is filling out.
There it is. Yeah.
You haven't asked. Go ahead.
Hi, I don't know if this is a question or just an observation, but it's interesting that you picked that last passage, because my view is that's when Turiddu shows his masculinity. He spends the rest of the opera wandering around, seducing women, wearing a cocked hat, wearing his feathers, not really knowing what to do, probably suffering from PTSD. But then when challenged, he rises to the challenge and shows his masculinity by going through with it. There are plenty of other comments I could make, but let me stop there.
No, I agree. By framing it in the way I didn't mean to imply there's anything wrong with Turiddu. I quite agree with you that this is in a way, his heroic moment. He's taking responsibility for his actions, and that can be heroic. But why then would the singers like Martine fight against it and not allow him to convey his emotions? You see what I'm getting at? That I think for the people at the time, they saw it as weakness, even if we may not see it that way now.
So you're saying the fact that he showed emotions as he went through was showing weakness?
I think it would run against what they used to call the stiff upper lip. I mean, he doesn't even get a cadence. The music, if he is about to break down, literally the song ends, his aria ends with an incomplete cadence. The orchestra bustles over the top of him as he makes his stage exit. This is not a man making a statement, take it as you will. It's a man who has to go somewhere, and he's interrupted as he leaves. Yeah. And he's going to die, but you don't have to see that, right? Whereas the end of the original Verga story is, and he lay on the ground and the blood gurgled in his throat and he could not say a damn word. And it's very much like, no, he's done for. Like Verga is putting it in your face, but for the stage you couldn't do that. You couldn't humiliate your tenor. That was actually why people had trouble with Bizet's Carmen. They humiliated the tenor too much. He lost control at the end, my God.
I think we have one more question here. The final question.
Do you think, like, for male performers to be more restrained about their weaknesses are kind of the reflection of societal norms back in the time? Because, like, we've got men got more rights, like especially during Puccini's time, like female don't, like it's very later on female got voting rights. And do you think it's more like lenient nowadays for men to express their weaknesses on stage, especially we've got transgender singers nowadays as well? Is it getting more socially accepted that men can perform their weaknesses on stage?
I think so. I hope so. There's also, I think, to some degree, a solidified sense in which our understanding of these roles has been so shaped by almost a century of highly emotional performance that we now see that as the text. And I'm not saying we should replace it, but I think if we see like the Corelli style of weeping Turiddu as normal, and we imagine that's how it was in 1890, I think we are not going to understand 1890 very well. It might not have been that way. But for singers today, I think it's absolutely wonderful that everybody can have emotions. I don't just cry at the opera. I cry at all kinds of things. I cried at an academic paper that I found particularly moving once. To be fair, it was about La Fanciulla del West, so come on. It was so I think it's okay. I think it's good, and I hope it continues that way. But I do get your broader point, which is these types of conversations are weighted and they have real implications on how people live their lives now. This is not just an academic thing. And I'm really grateful for that question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this paper.
We are breaking for lunch. we have quite a lot of time to spend. I mean, it's almost an hour and a half, perhaps a bit less. There are some changes when we come back. So we have another session with 2 presentations, another break, and then a final roundtable, which replaces what is on the program. Also so people watching online, the final session is a roundtable. Stay with us. See you later.